Tom Bradley's stomach growled as he limped through the lower decks of Gateway Station. His right knee hurt like hell, same as it had for the past 5 years. The pain was just another part of life now, like hunger and cold and the constant ache in his back from sleeping on metal floors. He'd been living on the station for 3 months, ever since the transport ship dropped him off and he couldn't afford passage anywhere else. The captain had felt sorry for him, let him work for his ticket by scrubbing the cargo hold. But that was as far as Tom's luck went. "Hey, you can't sleep here," a voice called out. Tom looked up to see a young security officer, couldn't be more than 25, pointing at the corner where Tom had been resting against a warm ventilation shaft. "Just catching my breath, officer," Tom said, pushing himself up with a grunt. His bones creaked like old machinery. "Yeah, well, catch it somewhere else. Commercial district is off limits to vagrants." Tom nodded and shuffled away, keeping his head down. No point in arguing. He'd learned that lesson the hard way his first week here when he'd talked back and spent 2 nights in a holding cell. At least the cell had been warm. The station was massive, home to nearly 10,000 souls from a dozen different species. Humans were common enough, but homeless humans were invisible. People looked right through him like he was a ghost. Maybe he was, in a way. The man he used to be had died a long time ago. As evening shift began, Tom made his way to the abandoned sections. Station authorities had sealed off the old military wing after the war ended, but the locks were cheap and Tom had plenty of time to figure them out. He slipped through a maintenance hatch that didn't quite seal properly and entered the darkened corridors beyond. The air here was stale but breathable. Emergency lights provided just enough glow to see by. Tom walked past rows of old equipment, crates marked with faded military stamps, and warning signs that nobody bothered to read anymore. This had been his sanctuary for weeks now, the one place security never checked. He turned a corner and stopped in front of the ship. She was a beauty once, or at least that's what the design suggested. 70 meters of military-grade hull plating with weapon mounts along her sides and engines that could probably still burn if anyone bothered to fuel them. The name was barely visible under decades of dust. Retribution. Tom had been sleeping in her cargo bay most nights. It was warmer than the corridors, and the old captain's quarters had a chair that was almost comfortable if you didn't mind the springs poking through. Tonight felt different though. The station's intercom had been buzzing with warnings all day about a solar storm approaching. Tom had seen a few in his time, knew they made the lights flicker and sometimes knocked out communications for a while. Nothing to worry about really. He climbed the access ramp, his footsteps echoing in the empty ship. The cargo bay was just as he'd left it, his few possessions tucked in the corner. A spare shirt, a tin cup, a blanket someone had thrown away. Not much to show for a life, but it was his. Tom made his way to the bridge, navigating by memory in the darkness. He'd explored every inch of this ship over the past weeks. Knew where the coffee maker used to be, where the navigation console sat dark and dead, where the weapons officer would have tracked targets. The captain's chair welcomed him like an old friend. He sank into it with a sigh, feeling the day's exhaustion settle into his bones. Through the main viewport, he could see the station's interior, the lights of shops and homes twinkling in the distance. So close and yet completely out of reach. The storm hit without warning. One moment everything was normal, the next the entire station shuddered. Tom gripped the armrests as the deck tilted slightly. Emergency klaxons began wailing somewhere far off. Through the viewport, he saw lightning dancing across the station's superstructure, brilliant blue-white arcs that jumped from surface to surface. Then one struck the ship. The bolt came through the viewport like the finger of an angry god, touching down on the main console. Tom's hair stood on end as electricity filled the air with the smell of ozone. He tried to jump from the chair but his muscles wouldn't respond, locked tight by some invisible force. Every screen on the bridge exploded into life. Monitors that hadn't worked in 40 years suddenly blazed with color. The console lights flickered on in sequence, red and green and amber. Somewhere deep in the ship's guts, machinery began to hum. The deck vibrated beneath Tom's feet as power surged through systems that should have been long dead. A holographic display materialized in front of the captain's chair, spinning geometric patterns that resolved into text. Tom's heart hammered in his chest as he read the words scrolling past. System diagnostics. Power levels. Weapon status. And then something that made his blood run cold. Biometric scan initiated, a synthetic voice announced, clear and sharp in the darkness. Scanning retinal pattern. Scanning DNA markers. Scanning neural signature. No, Tom whispered. No, no, no. Red laser light swept across his face, so quick he barely had time to blink. The ship's AI processed the information in microseconds, cross-referencing against military databases that were supposed to have been wiped clean decades ago. Identity confirmed, the voice said, and Tom heard triumph in those artificial tones. Captain Thomas James Bradley. Service number 77428. Authorization code Phoenix. Welcome back, sir. It has been 14,612 days since your last login. The bridge lights came on at full intensity, blinding him. Somewhere in the station, alarms began to scream. Not the storm warnings, but security alerts, the kind that meant someone had triggered something they shouldn't have. Tom knew exactly what they'd found. His fingerprints were all over the Alliance military database now, lit up like a flare in the darkness. He lunged for the door, but it was too late. Through the viewport he could see security teams mobilizing, running toward the abandoned military section with weapons drawn. Behind them came others, aliens in diplomatic robes, their faces twisted with old hatred. They knew who he was now. What he was. What he'd done. Tom Bradley, the man who'd been invisible for so long, was suddenly the only thing anyone could see. The security team arrived within 3 minutes, their boots thundering through the abandoned corridors. Tom stood at the top of the ship's ramp with his hands raised, trying to look as harmless and old as he actually felt. But the looks on their faces told him that harmless wasn't what they saw anymore. Station Commander Lisa Grant led the team herself, which told Tom everything he needed to know about how serious this was. Grant was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense, the kind of officer who'd earned her position through competence rather than connections. Her weapon stayed pointed at the deck, but her finger rested near the trigger guard. "Step away from the ship, sir," she said, her voice carrying the weight of command. Slowly. Tom complied, his old joints protesting as he descended the ramp. Behind Grant stood at least 20 armed personnel, and beyond them he could see others gathering. Aliens mostly, their faces ranging from curious to absolutely murderous. "I'm not armed," Tom said quietly. "I was just looking for a place to sleep." "We know who you are," Grant said, and her voice had gone cold. "The ship identified you. Thomas Bradley. Captain Thomas Bradley." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some of the younger humans looked confused, but the older ones and most of the aliens clearly recognized the name. Tom saw fear flicker across several faces and anger on others. One of the aliens pushed forward, a Vorton with the deep purple skin and ridge-lined head of his species. He wore diplomatic robes, which meant he had authority to speak. "That is impossible," the Vorton said, his translator device rendering his words in flat, emotionless tones. "Thomas Bradley died 40 years ago at the Battle of Crimson Nebula. His ship was destroyed." "That's what the report said," Grant replied, her eyes never leaving Tom. "But the Retribution's AI doesn't lie about biometric scans. DNA, retinal pattern, neural signature, all match the military database. This is him." She pulled out a tablet and turned it so everyone could see. Files scrolled across the screen, each one stamped with classification markers that should have kept them buried forever. Tom's service record. Battle reports. Commendations and court-martial proceedings side by side. And images, dozens of images he wished had stayed forgotten. Fleet Captain Thomas Bradley in his dress uniform, chest covered in medals, shaking hands with the Alliance president. Captain Bradley on the bridge of the Retribution, younger and harder, giving orders during combat. And then the darker images, the ones that made Tom's stomach twist even now. Vorton colonies burning. Debris fields where passenger ships used to be. Casualty reports with numbers so high they stopped meaning anything. "The Battle of Crimson Nebula," Grant read aloud. Alliance forces outnumbered 3-1. Captain Bradley lured the Vorton fleet into a false retreat, then detonated captured antimatter warheads positioned in the debris field. 17 Vorton capital ships destroyed. Estimated casualties 240,000. The Vorton diplomat's skin had darkened to almost black with rage. "He murdered our people." Civilian transports were in that fleet. Medical ships. Colony evacuation vessels. "They were mixed in with your military ships on purpose," Tom said quietly, the old arguments rising automatically to his lips. "You used them as shields, hoping I wouldn't fire. And you fired anyway," the Vorton spat. Tom met his eyes without flinching. "Yes, I did. Because if I hadn't, you would have reached the Centauri colonies and killed 500,000 humans. So I made the choice. I've lived with it every day since." Grant scrolled through more files. The Siege of Altair 7. The Scorched Path Campaign. The Vorton homeworld blockade where you threatened to irradiate their atmosphere if they didn't surrender. She looked up at Tom and he couldn't read the expression on her face. "The Alliance credited you with ending the war. single-handedly forcing the Vorton Empire and two of their allies to sue for peace rather than face you in battle. They made me a monster, Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. They needed someone who would do what others wouldn't. Someone who could make the hard choices and live with the nightmares afterward. So I became that person. And when the war ended, when they didn't need a monster anymore, they were happy to make me disappear. He looked around at all the faces watching him. Young security officers who hadn't been born when he fought. Aliens whose species had suffered under his tactics. Even a few older humans who remembered the war, remembered the victory parades and the celebrations when peace was declared. After the armistice, I went to Alliance Command and requested discharge. They agreed on the condition that my identity be scrubbed from public records. My enhancements were removed, my service record classified, and Thomas Bradley was officially listed as killed in action. They gave me a new name, a small pension, and told me to disappear. So I did. Grant's tactical officer, a lean man named Jake Morrison, stepped forward. The neural enhancements. The combat prediction algorithms they hardwired into your brain. You're saying they removed all that? Tom shrugged. They tried. Cut out most of the hardware, suppressed the software with inhibitor treatments. But you can't completely erase 40 years of training and augmentation. It's still in there, buried deep. I just don't use it anymore. Why not? Morrison asked. With those abilities you could have done anything. Private security, corporate warfare, mercenary work. People would have paid fortunes for someone with your skills. Because I didn't want to be that person anymore, Tom said simply. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces of everyone I'd killed. Heard the screams from ships venting atmosphere. Watched colonies burn. The enhancements made me better at killing, but they didn't make me better at living with it. The Vorton diplomat's anger hadn't faded. He should stand trial for his crimes. War crimes. Genocide. The murder of civilian populations. Under the terms of the armistice, all wartime actions were granted amnesty, Grant said, though she didn't sound happy about it. Both sides agreed to let the past stay in the past. That was before we knew he was still alive, the Vorton argued. The agreement was made believing he was dead. This changes everything. Other aliens were nodding now, voices rising in agreement. Tom could see the situation spiraling out of control. He'd known this day would come eventually, that his past would catch up with him. He just hadn't expected it to happen like this, on some backwater station in the middle of nowhere. Grant raised her hand for silence. This is beyond my authority to decide. I'm placing Captain Bradley under protective custody until Alliance Command can review the situation. No one touches him without going through proper channels. She gestured to her security team. Take him to holding cell 3. Post guards. And someone get me a secure line to headquarters. They're going to want to know about this immediately. As they led Tom away in restraints, he caught one last glimpse of the Retribution through the crowd. The old ship's lights were still on, systems still active after all these years of silence. She recognized her captain and came back to life. Tom wondered if that was a blessing or a curse. In about 12 hours he'd find out which. The holding cell wasn't terrible as prisons went. Clean, temperature-controlled, with a cot that was more comfortable than most places Tom had slept in recent years. They'd even brought him a hot meal, the first real food he'd eaten in weeks. But the energy field humming across the doorway reminded him that this courtesy could evaporate at any moment. Commander Grant visited him 6 hours after his arrest. She looked exhausted, like she'd been arguing with people for hours. Knowing what Tom did about bureaucracy and interstellar politics, she probably had been. Alliance Command is sending a tribunal, she said, standing outside the cell. Should be here in 3 days. Until then, you're my problem. Sorry about that, Tom said. He meant it. Grant studied him for a long moment. I read your full file. The classified parts. What they asked you to do during the war, it wasn't right. You were 28 years old when they put those implants in your head and told you to win at any cost. I still made the choices, Tom replied. Nobody forced my hand on the triggers. Maybe not, but they created the situation where those were the only choices available. She shook her head. For what it's worth, my grandfather served under you at Altair 7. He said you were the bravest officer he ever knew. Also the saddest. Tom smiled despite himself. Smart man, your grandfather. The conversation ended when alarms began shrieking throughout the station. Not security alerts this time, but something worse. The emergency klaxons that meant external threat, incoming attack, all hands to battle stations. Grant's communicator erupted with chatter. She listened for maybe 10 seconds before her face went pale. That's impossible, she breathed. What is it? Tom asked, already knowing the answer wouldn't be good. She looked at him with wide eyes. Long-range sensors just detected a fleet dropping out of hyperspace. 12 capital ships, Vorton design. She swallowed hard. Commander, the Vorton Empire collapsed 40 years ago. Their homeworld is a wasteland. There shouldn't be any fleets. Tom felt ice settle in his gut. Remnants. Fanatics who couldn't accept the defeat. I warned Command this might happen, that some of them would go into hiding and wait for their moment. Well, their moment is apparently now, Grant said, already moving. The defense grid is activating, but we only have 8 cruisers in range. Against 12 Vorton dreadnoughts, we're outmatched. She started to leave, then paused. Stay here. Whatever happens, stay in this cell. If the station falls, at least they won't find you immediately. The energy field dropped and she was gone, running toward the command center. Tom sat alone in his cell, listening to the chaos building outside. Boots pounding on metal deck plates. Officers shouting orders. The deep throb of the station's defensive shields powering up. Then the sounds of battle began. Even from deep in the holding cells, Tom could hear the station shudder as weapons fire impacted the shields. The lights flickered. Emergency systems kicked in, bathing everything in red. Tom counted the minutes in his head, timing the impacts, calculating engagement distances based on sound delay. Old habits died hard. Even without his enhancements fully active, his mind automatically built a tactical picture of the battle happening outside. It wasn't going well. 15 minutes into the engagement, the lights went out completely. Emergency power failed. Tom heard screams in the distance, cut off abruptly. The shield impacts stopped, which meant either the station's defenses had fallen or the attacking ships had moved on to other targets. He waited in the darkness, wondering if this was how it would end. Killed by an enemy he defeated 40 years ago, dying nameless in a cell while the station burned around him. The energy field across his cell door flickered and died. Lockdown procedures had failed when main power went offline. Tom could walk out anytime he wanted. He stayed put. Grant had told him to stay here, and despite everything he respected that. She'd shown him more courtesy than he probably deserved. The decision was taken from him when Grant herself appeared, running down the corridor with a flashlight. Blood streaked her uniform from a cut above her eye. Bradley, we need you. Now. What happened? Tom asked, already moving. They hit us with some kind of cyber warfare we've never seen before, Grant said as they ran. Seized control of our ship's computers, turned our weapons offline, locked out navigation. 6 of our cruisers are dead in space. The other 2 are retreating. We've lost half our shields and we're venting atmosphere on 3 decks. They reached a stairwell and climbed, Grant's breath coming in gasps. Their commander broadcast a message. Says they've been hiding in dark space for 40 years, rebuilding, evolving their technology. They've been waiting for humanity to spread thin, for our defenses to relax. Now they're taking back what we took from them. Tom's tactical mind was already working. How many stations are in range? How much of the fleet can respond? None close enough to help, Grant said grimly. We're a frontier station, 3 days from the nearest major base. By the time reinforcements arrive, we'll be ash. They emerged onto the command deck. The main screen showed a nightmare. 12 massive Vorton warships in attack formation, their hulls upgraded with technology that looked almost organic. The station's remaining shields were at 30% and dropping. Debris from destroyed ships drifted past the viewports. Jake Morrison looked up from the tactical station, relief flooding his face when he saw Tom. Sir, we need a miracle. These aren't the Vortons we remember. Their tech has evolved beyond anything in our database. Tom studied the tactical display, his old instincts kicking in. The enemy formation was perfect, textbook assault pattern. Which meant they were following doctrine, thinking in predictable ways. What assets do we have left? Just the station's fixed defenses, and those are failing fast, Grant said. Our fleet is neutralized. Civilian ships are evacuating, but the Vortons are targeting escape pods. They're not here to conquer. They're here to exterminate. What about the Retribution? Tom asked quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. Morrison spoke first. That ship is 40 years old. No shields, no modern weapons, systems barely functional even after the lightning strike brought her online. Exactly, Tom said. No modern systems means nothing for them to hack. No wireless connections, no networked computers, no digital vulnerabilities. Everything on that ship is manual, analog, old school. They can't seize what isn't there. Grant caught on immediately. You want to fight them with museum piece technology. I want to fight them the way we did 40 years ago before we got dependent on computers doing our thinking for us. Tom looked at the screen, at the 3,000 souls on this station whose only crime was being in the wrong place when old hatred came calling. That ship recognized me as her captain. She'll fly for me. Question is, will anyone fly with me? Morrison didn't hesitate. I will. I'm tired of watching computers fight our battles while we sit helpless. Grant looked at her tactical officer, then back at Tom. I should say no. You're technically under arrest. That ship isn't certified for combat. This violates about 40 regulations. But, Tom prompted. She smiled, fierce and determined. But I've got 3,000 people on this station who'll die if I follow regulations. I need a captain who knows how to win when the odds are impossible. She held out her hand. The Retribution is yours, Captain Bradley. Try not to get us all killed. Tom shook her hand, feeling the weight of command settle on his shoulders once more. He tried to leave this life behind, tried to bury the warrior under years of anonymity and regret. But some debts never got paid. Some duties never ended. The monster was waking up again, and this time Tom didn't fight it. Tom ran toward the Retribution with Grant and Morrison close behind. Every step sent pain shooting through his bad knee, but adrenaline pushed him forward. Behind them, the station shuddered as another Vorton barrage hammered the failing shields. The ship's ramp was already lowering when they arrived. The AI had been listening, waiting. Tom had forgotten how smart these old military systems were, how they learned to anticipate their captain's needs during long combat deployments. We need crew, Grant said as they climbed aboard. 20 minimum to operate a ship this size. Put out the call for volunteers, Tom replied, heading straight for the bridge. Anyone with military experience, even basic training. We don't have time to be picky. The bridge lights came on as Tom entered, systems humming to life like the ship had been waiting 40 years just for this moment. He slid into the captain's chair and his hands moved automatically to the controls, muscle memory taking over. His fingers found switches and buttons in the darkness, each one exactly where he remembered. Grant took the first officer's station while Morrison headed to weapons control. Within 5 minutes, others began arriving. A mix of station personnel and civilians, some in uniform, others in work clothes. An older woman named Betty who'd served as a navigator 30 years ago. A young kid named Danny who'd washed out of flight school but knew his way around an engine room. 2 cargo haulers, a medical technician, even the station's head cook who'd been a Marine sergeant in his youth. 23 souls in total. Not enough, not properly trained, but it would have to do. Listen up, Tom said, his voice carrying through the ship's intercom. This vessel is 40 years out of date. No automated systems, no AI assistance, no computer-guided weapons. Everything is manual. That means we do this old school, the way our grandparents fought. He pulled up a tactical display, the green phosphor screen flickering with targeting data. The Vortons have evolved their technology, made it smarter and more connected. That's their strength and their weakness. They're used to fighting enemies who rely on computers. We're going to show them what happens when humans fight with their own brains. Outside, the Vorton fleet was tightening its formation around the station. The command ship, a massive dreadnought twice the size of the others, hung back while smaller vessels moved in for the kill. Engines online, Danny reported from engineering. We've got maybe 70% power. Fuel cells are old but they're holding. Weapons hot, Morrison called out. 4 missile tubes loaded, railguns charging. No guidance systems though, boss. We're shooting blind. Not blind, Tom corrected. We're shooting manual. Betty, can you plot an intercept course with the nearest Vorton ship? The old navigator's fingers flew across her console. Done. Transmitting to helm now. Tom felt the ship lurch as they pulled away from the docking clamp. The Retribution wasn't graceful anymore, wasn't the sleek predator she'd been in her prime. But she moved and that was enough. The Vorton fleet noticed immediately. Tom watched their formation shift, 3 ships breaking off to intercept. They probably thought this was amusing, one ancient ship challenging their modern armada. All power to forward shields, Tom ordered. Morrison, hold fire until we're at 2,000 meters. Betty, evasive pattern Delta 7. Sir, that pattern isn't in any modern manual, Betty said, confused. I know. I invented it 40 years ago. Trust me. The ship began to weave, not the smooth computer-guided movements of modern vessels but a jerky, unpredictable dance. The Vortons fired, their weapons tracking where the Retribution should be, where their computers predicted she would go. But Tom wasn't following any algorithm. He was flying on instinct, making choices no computer could predict. 3 plasma bolts missed by meters. The 4th clipped their starboard side, but the old shields held. 1,500 meters, Morrison counted down. 1,000. Sir, they're targeting our weapons systems. Let them try, Tom said calmly. His hands moved across the controls, firing maneuvering thrusters in sequences that made no tactical sense. The ship spun, dove, climbed at angles that should have been impossible. Inside Tom's head, something was waking up. The old implants, the ones they tried to remove, were responding to combat stress. His vision sharpened. Time seemed to slow. He could see the enemy weapons charging, predict their firing solutions before they locked on. 800 meters. 600. Tom's eyes narrowed as patterns emerged from the chaos. The Vorton ships were moving in formation, their computers coordinating every action. Perfect synchronization. Perfect predictability. Now, Tom said quietly. Morrison fired all 4 missiles simultaneously. No guidance systems, no target locks, just raw ballistic trajectories calculated by human intuition. The Vortons tried to intercept, but their point defense was calibrated for smart missiles that would evade and maneuver. These missiles just flew straight and fast. 2 struck home. The nearest Vorton ship's shields collapsed and 1 missile punched through the hull, detonating deep inside. The vessel began to list, venting atmosphere and debris. Hard to port, Tom ordered. Full burn on main engines. Betty, plot course through that debris field. Captain, we'll never make it through that gap, she protested. We will if we don't think about it too much. Do it. The Retribution plunged into the expanding cloud of wreckage from the damaged Vorton ship. Metal fragments pinged off their hull. An entire section of bulkhead tumbled past, close enough to touch. Tom's hands danced across the controls, threading the needle through gaps that closed in seconds. They emerged on the other side, directly behind the Vorton formation. For a moment, the enemy ships were perfectly positioned, unable to fire without hitting each other. Morrison railguns. Fire at will. The old kinetic weapons opened up, hurling magnetically accelerated slugs at relativistic speeds. No fancy energy weapons, no complex targeting. Just chunks of dense metal moving fast enough to punch through anything. One Vorton ship took 3 hits before it could maneuver. Its engines exploded, sending the vessel into an uncontrolled spin. Another lost its command deck, the bridge section simply vanishing in a spray of metal and frozen atmosphere. They're breaking formation, Grant reported, something like awe in her voice. The entire fleet is scattering. Tom understood why. The Vortons had spent 40 years preparing to fight modern Alliance ships with their networked computers and predictable AI patterns. They had no doctrine for dealing with a crazy old man flying a museum piece like it was a fighter craft instead of a capital ship. Don't let up, Tom said. His voice had changed, gone cold and hard. The warrior personality that he'd buried for decades was fully awake now. Target their command ship. That's where their fleet coordination is happening. Kill the brain and the body dies. The massive Vorton dreadnought was trying to maneuver, but it was too large, too slow. Tom sent the Retribution into a spiraling attack run that no sane captain would attempt. G-forces pushed everyone hard into their seats. Warning alarms screamed as the ship's structural integrity groaned under the stress. Missile lock from the dreadnought, Morrison warned. Multiple launches, 20 birds inbound. Countermeasures, Tom ordered. Then he grinned, a expression without humor. Actually, belay that. Danny, vent coolant from the port side tanks. All of it. Sir, that'll create a massive thermal signature. The missiles will. Exactly. Do it now. Superheated coolant sprayed into space, creating a brilliant cloud of gas and radiation. The Vorton missiles, tracking heat signatures, dove into the cloud and detonated harmlessly. The Retribution shot through the fireball, shields glowing cherry red but holding. 200 meters to the dreadnought. 100. Tom's fingers found the manual firing controls, the same ones he'd used countless times 4 decades ago. For everyone they killed today, he said quietly. Fire. Every weapon the Retribution had left fired simultaneously. Missiles, railguns, even the old point defense cannons. The Vorton dreadnought's shields collapsed under the sustained barrage. Hull plating cracked. Internal explosions rippled through its structure. The massive ship went dark, dead in space. The remaining Vorton vessels, seeing their command ship destroyed, broke off their attack and jumped to hyperspace. The battle was over. The bridge of the Retribution was silent except for the hum of cooling systems and the ragged breathing of the crew. Tom sat in the captain's chair, his hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. His head pounded like someone was driving nails through his skull. The old implants weren't meant to activate anymore, and forcing them awake had consequences. "Damage report," he managed to say, his voice hoarse. Morrison looked up from his console, face pale but smiling. "Hull breaches on decks 3 and 7, both sealed. Shields are down to 8%. We've got fires in the port cargo bay, but damage control teams are on it. Engine room is holding together with duct tape and prayers. Casualties: 2 injured, neither serious. Betty broke her wrist when we pulled that last maneuver. Danny's got some burns from a coolant leak." Morrison shook his head in disbelief. "Sir, we just took on 12 Vorton ships with a crew of 23 and a boat that should be in a museum. We shouldn't be alive." "No," Tom agreed quietly. "We shouldn't." Grant's communicator chirped. She listened for a moment, then smiled. "Station command reports all Vorton vessels have fled the system. We're secure. Evacuation ships are returning." She looked at Tom with something close to wonder. "You actually did it? You saved 3,000 lives." Tom didn't feel like a hero. He felt old and tired and sick. Every muscle ached. His vision kept blurring at the edges, the implants overheating in his skull. And worst of all, he remembered how good it had felt. The clarity of combat, the purity of purpose, the satisfaction of outthinking and outfighting an enemy. He'd missed it, and that terrified him. The next 72 hours were a blur. Medical teams checked the crew. Engineers swarmed the Retribution, amazed the old ship had survived. News of the battle spread through the station, then to other systems. Within a day, Alliance Command was calling. Admiral Patricia Walsh appeared on the main screen in Grant's office, her uniform crisp and her expression unreadable. She was in her 60s, old enough to remember the war, young enough to have fought in the later campaigns. "Captain Bradley," she said, and Tom noticed she used his rank. "I've reviewed the battle logs. Frankly, I'm having trouble believing what I'm seeing. You defeated a technologically superior force with a ship that has no business being operational." "The ship did most of the work, ma'am," Tom replied. "I just pointed her in the right direction." Walsh's expression softened slightly. "Don't be modest, Captain. I know what you did. I also know what it cost you." She paused. "Alliance Command wants to offer you full reinstatement. Fleet Captain rank, your choice of posting. We need officers who can think outside the box, who understand that technology isn't a replacement for tactical brilliance." Tom had expected this. "With respect, Admiral, I'm going to decline." "May I ask why?" He chose his words carefully. "The implants they put in my head 40 years ago, the ones that were supposed to be deactivated, they came back online during the battle. Right now, I'm seeing threat assessments everywhere I look. My brain is calculating kill probabilities for everyone in this room. I look at Grant and I see 17 ways to neutralize her if she became hostile. That's not normal. That's not healthy." Walsh nodded slowly. "The combat prediction algorithms. They warned us about persistent effects when the program was discontinued. It's more than effects, ma'am. It's who I become when I'm fighting. There's a part of me that's very good at war, and that part doesn't shut off easily. I spent 40 years learning to bury it, to be just a regular person. One battle and it's all back, stronger than ever." He leaned forward, making sure she understood. "I can't be that person full-time. I won't. Because if I do, I'll end up like the old commanders we read about in history books. The ones who were so good at war they couldn't stop seeing enemies everywhere. They ended up alone, paranoid, destroying themselves because they couldn't turn off the warrior mindset." Grant spoke up. "Sir, if I may. What if there was a middle ground?" Both Tom and Walsh turned to look at her. She continued, "Captain Bradley doesn't want to be an active duty officer, and I understand why. But what if we kept him on as a reserve asset? A specialist consultant who trains others but isn't on the front lines constantly." Walsh considered this. "What did you have in mind, Commander?" "Gateway Station is a frontier post. We're far enough from the core systems that we see threats others don't. We could use someone who understands unconventional warfare, who can teach our officers how to fight when all the fancy technology fails." Grant looked at Tom. "And it would keep you engaged without putting you back in uniform full-time." Tom felt something loosen in his chest. "Teaching. I could do that." "There's another consideration," Walsh said. "What happened here proves that our enemies are evolving. The Vortons adapted their technology specifically to counter our reliance on networked systems. Other threats will do the same. We need institutional knowledge of pre-digital warfare, of the tactics and strategies that don't depend on computers." She pulled up a file on her screen. "I'm authorizing the creation of a new training program at Gateway Station. Unconventional warfare and historical combat tactics. You'd run it, set your own schedule, choose your own students. Not a military command, but a teaching position with civilian contractor status. What about the war crimes charges? Tom asked. The Vorton diplomatic delegation was pretty clear about wanting me tried. The Vortons who attacked this station violated the armistice first, Walsh said firmly. Their remnant fleet committed acts of terrorism against civilian targets. Any claims they had against you died when they broke the peace treaty. The other species who had issues with your wartime actions have, let's say, reconsidered their positions after you saved a multi-species station. She smiled slightly. Turns out people are more forgiving of harsh tactics when those tactics save their lives. You've got a clean slate, Captain. What you do with it is up to you. Tom thought about it. Teaching meant staying in one place, having a purpose, being useful without being a weapon. He could share what he knew without having to use it constantly. Train others to be prepared for the worst while hoping they'd never need those skills. I'll do it, he said. On one condition. I don't wear a uniform, I don't hold rank, and students understand they're learning from someone who made terrible choices during terrible times. I won't be glorified. I'm a cautionary tale as much as I am an instructor. Agreed, Walsh said. Welcome back, Mr. Bradley. On your terms this time. 3 months later, Tom stood in front of his first class. 20 students, mixture of humans and aliens, all young officers who'd volunteered for the program. The classroom was small, tucked in a quiet corner of Gateway Station. No fancy equipment, just screens and models and Tom's experience. My name is Tom Bradley, he began. 40 years ago, I was a fleet captain in the Vorton War. I won battles that should have been losses. I saved millions of lives. I also ended millions of lives, many of them civilians caught in the crossfire of decisions I made. You let that sink in. I'm not here to teach you how to be heroes. I'm here to teach you how to survive when everything goes wrong. When your computers fail, when your weapons won't fire, when you're outnumbered and outgunned and the only thing you have left is your brain and your will to protect the people counting on you. A young human officer raised his hand. His name tag read Collins. Sir, why not just improve our technology so we don't have those failures? Because technology can always be countered, Tom replied. The Vortons proved that 3 months ago. But human adaptability, creativity, the ability to look at a hopeless situation and find a way through it, that's something no enemy can prepare for. That's what makes us dangerous. He walked to the window looking out at the Retribution dock nearby. The old ship was being restored, turned into a training vessel for the program. I'm going to teach you things that might seem brutal. Tactics that prioritize victory over fairness, survival over honor. And after I teach you these things, I'm going to teach you when not to use them. Because the real skill isn't knowing how to fight dirty. It's knowing when you have to and when you can choose a better way. The students listened, some nodding, others looking uncertain. Tom understood. He was asking them to stare into the same darkness that had swallowed him, to learn from his mistakes without making them themselves. One more thing, he said. Every lesson I teach you, I'm going to share the cost of using it. The nightmares, the guilt, the way it changes you. You'll learn not just how I won battles but what winning took from me. Maybe that way you'll be smarter than I was. After class, Tom returned to his quarters. They weren't much, just a small apartment on the station's residential level. But they were his, a place he'd chosen rather than wherever he could find to sleep. He had a bed, a desk, a window with a view of the stars. On the desk sat a photo from the victory celebration 40 years ago. Young Captain Bradley in full uniform, surrounded by cheering crowds. He looked proud and confident and completely unaware of how much that victory would cost him. Tom kept the photo as a reminder. Not of glory but of the price of winning. Every time he looked at it, he remembered why he taught, why he shared his knowledge while warning against becoming what he'd been. Outside his window, the stars shone cold and distant. Somewhere out there, other threats were waiting. Other enemies planning, adapting, preparing for the day they'd strike. But Gateway Station had its guardian now. Not a hero in uniform, but a teacher who'd learned that the hardest battles weren't fought with weapons. They were fought with choices, every single day, about what kind of person you wanted to be when the fighting finally stopped.